The objective: to deliver the NBA to you like no other. News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gunn. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. I'm sorry, I'm doing the voice. I will stop doing the voice.
I liked the voice.
It wasn't bad. You know,
I thought it was pretty good.
Listen, on the live show, I started to get bored with my own voice, so I started to do it in the announcer podcast voice. I'm like, yes, Damian Lillard, he scored 3. You know, I got into it.
It's NBA Live 06 reminiscent.
Yeah, you know what it is. You know what it is. Lauren, I hope your week is going fantastic. I know you are going through a lot with work. You're busy bee. I would say busy is better than not busy. That's my own opinion. I prefer that. But I understand being like overwhelmed. So I get it. Listen, the NBA is also in an overwhelming state right now. I will say that because obviously the games are underway as we speak. The Toronto Raptors are playing the New Orleans Pelicans. There are other games going on right now as well. So the quote unquote second half of the season is underway. I'd say second half in air quotes, because there's really only 25 games left, something around 20 games left for almost every team. So it's more the last third of the season than anything else. But it is the most important third, that's for sure, because there are still a lot of playoff races, a lot of things that will come down to the last 10 or so games in the season. And these fringe moves, these marginal moves, if you will, that teams are making right now with the buyout market will be very interesting and we'll probably see play out over the next couple of weeks. One of those moves being the Atlanta Hawks firing Nate McMillan off the heels of a subpar so far start to the season. I say start again in air quotes. It's been 3/4 of a season, but it seems like the writing was on the wall with McMillan, to be honest with you. We talked about it a bunch when we've brought up Trae Young on this podcast, is that, hey, obviously there's something there between him and McMillan. There were the reports of Nate McMillan. Actually, it wasn't even a report. It was a quote from Nate McMillan saying that he seems like he had lost the roster and they're not really listening to him anymore. And when a coach is admitting that, you know that something is around the corner. So I'm not surprised by this. But Lauren, I'm sort of curious what the aftermath of this is. And I tweeted it. I mentioned, I'm like, I feel like Trae Young might be the next star to ask out. Now, a lot of people pushed back on that. A lot of people did. Of course, Hawks fans were not happy with me. And I understand. Like, I would get mad, too, if it's like, dude, this is the guy we traded Luka Doncic for. What do you mean he's going to ask out? This is ridiculous. We're curtailing everything towards him. They fired the entire front office and changed things up and hired Landry Fields and Kyle Korver. Right. And they've switched it up so that he's happy with things. And now they've let go of a second coach after letting go of Lloyd Pierce because of the fact that Trae didn't mesh with Lloyd Pierce or Nate McMillan. And now there's the report that they're thinking of hiring Quinn Snyder, which I like the fit.
Yeah.
I think that's good. I think for an offense that has struggled this season, that shouldn't be struggling. They're 16th in offense this season. And when you have a guy like Trae Young, when you have DeJounte Murray, guys like John Collins, Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, you should be a better offense. So absolutely. I like the Quinn Snyder hiring. I just wonder if it's more of a stopgap. If this is it's just you're kind of delaying the inevitable with the whole Trae Young situation. And it's crazy to say this because we're not that far into the Trae Young saga in Atlanta. So what do you think? Do you think he ends up being the next star? Am I being a little crazy on that, or?
Yeah, I don't think you're being crazy. I think anybody is always going to push back when you see a franchise cornerstone, the guy that gets drafted, the entire, not entire identity, but the franchise cornerstone. Yeah. You're always going to push back on the thought of him, either asking out, leaving, whatever the case may be. But I don't think it's unreasonable at all, because on top of the Nate McMillan stuff. I mean, this isn't the first, and I don't want to say like Trae Young issue. Trae Young is the root of the issue. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we've just seen multiple instances of friction within the Atlanta Hawks organization, really just in this Trae Young era. And again, yeah. I'm not suggesting he's the common denominator, but it just doesn't seem like they can get on the same page. It doesn't seem like they can just get everything firing on all cylinders, with the exception, I guess, of that Eastern Conference Finals run a couple years back. And everybody was sort of expecting them to build on that. And personally, I think since then, they've just continued to take step back after step back. And I will give them credit for being willing to go out and making a DeJounte Murray trade, for going out and being willing to shake up the front office. But now you're at a point where it does feel like you're getting dangerously close to that quote unquote inevitable, because I think most people would agree that the state of the NBA, people move, people switch. That's just how it works. I mean, I think that's just reasonable to expect. It's really just kind of a question of when, which is really maybe even a morbid approach. Good Lord.
What up, Winston?
He is just, he's on one tonight. But yeah, with Trae, I hate to say that it is inevitable, but it does sort of feel that way. And to me, you're now at the point where every single, and actually, let me throw this back at you. Mm-hmm. I think you're at a point where it's like, okay, we need to save this situation at all costs. So you do want every move to maybe get his stamp of approval on it, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. The front office, you're all moving in the right direction. But the question I kind of want to throw back to you is, do you think that that's the right move? Is it the right call to put that much control in somebody's hands, or does there need to be more of a balance? What should they be doing? Because personally, for a long time, I have been sitting here watching the situation saying it is just not going well, and it just is continuing in the wrong direction. So I don't know what that answer is for them, but I do like the Quinn Snyder hire if that goes through.
Yeah, if it goes through, we'll see what happens. I think it's interesting because the guest we're going to be having on later on this podcast is a Brooklyn Nets writer. He covers the Brooklyn Nets, and what better way to talk about players taking control of a front office and their decision making than talking about the Brooklyn Nets? I think the aspect of Kyrie and KD essentially just controlling every move that happens with the Nets is sort of a blemish on the whole idea of players having a large say in what happens organizationally, because they're always going to look out for themselves, not for the team aspect of things. And that is, at the end of the day, like, not every player is going to be a good GM. Not every player is going to have a GM's type of mind. So when they're going out here and voicing their frustrations, it's important for them to be heard, but heard is different than we must act on this.
Yes.
And I think that's something that has to be that is something that has to be addressed from the get-go with a star. It's not something you can fix halfway through, because as we've seen with other situations in the past, you can't just take away that responsibility from a superstar, because it ends up being a trade demand. You need to establish that from the minute they get drafted, from the minute they sign on, that, like, yes, you are a huge part of this organization. We want you to be the building block, but let us build a team around you. Trust us with these decisions. And I think to a certain extent, like, we've seen that with Luka and the Mavericks. I think there has been this trust, although there will always be questions of, who knows? Maybe he ends up getting tired. And that's just part of having a superstar. Having a superstar means that you will always question and second guess whether they are content and happy. But I think with Trae Young, there's always the element of, like, okay, have we given up too much control over this situation for it to ever be salvaged? And I'm not sure. I really am not sure at all if this is going to be the case. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Atlanta, because if it is Trae that ends up getting moved, now I have no idea what team would be interested in a guy like Trae Young, because he makes it so that, like, obviously the defense has been well documented how bad of a defender he is. Right. It's so hard to rationalize for a team being like, hey, we're going to build our team around this guy. And also a guy who, whether you agree with the statement or not, has, if you're reading the tea leaves, has not been the best of leaders in the locker room, if you will. So now it's just like, all right, so we're trading for a guy who hasn't necessarily been the best locker room guy, hasn't necessarily been that leader that we've asked of him, and also is so far off base with one aspect of the basketball, the one of the most important aspects of basketball, that it makes it so hard to build around him. So are you willing to mortgage your future for a player like that? Is he the type of player that you can mortgage your future for? I think Trae Young is a phenomenal talent, man. Like, there's no question. And I know this is being extra hard on him, but the man is a wizard offensively. He is one of the best playmakers and engines in the entire NBA. But it's these other questions that leaves you wanting more. It leaves a lot to be desired in other categories. And I think that's the interesting aspect of this.
This week on the Chris Johnston Show. In terms of, I know we were kind of talking about it with regards to mentioning Vitaly Kravtsov. What exactly is the ask for Patrick Kane?
They haven't really got around to asking yet because they haven't been able to shop him. I think the fact that it's likely to be one team, if there's any team at all, really hinders what the Blackhawks can get in a trade here. Maybe you're talking a second round pick and a prospect. I think that's what, when we're talking about what makes sense, if it ends up being a team like Dallas, I mean, Dallas has so many, for a top team, they've got a really nice prospect pool. I think they'd be willing to give up a second round pick. I think that there's a lot of interest from the Stars end to make this happen.
Let's shift over to two buyout guys that have signed. I think this is also another guy who has had a well-documented, drama saga, if you will. Seems like everything that revolves around Russell Westbrook is like that, but he has ended up going to the Los Angeles Clippers. I personally would have liked him going to a different team. I think the reason I say that is because the Clippers are in a situation with the trade deadline moves that they made of Bones Highland and Eric Gordon and Mason Plumlee and refining their guard rotation off the bench, where I sort of feel like adding Russell Westbrook is not necessary. Like, they didn't really need a guy of Russell Westbrook's abilities. Now, to be fair, he provides rim pressure. He provides like attack and moving with pace. And I think those are things that the Clippers desperately need. So yeah, in theory, that should help. But the poor shot selection, the turnover heavy offense that he likes to play makes me second guess if he's really going to be playing a lot of minutes. And from what we've seen, from the quotes we've seen from Ty Lue, from other guys on the roster, from essentially Russ himself even, it seems like he's up for a big role. Like, he's probably going to start. And I'm just not sure if that makes a lot of sense. Now, if like there's some kind of relationship there between Ty Lue and Russ, and there's an understanding that, okay, we're going to start you at the beginning, but if things don't work out, we're going to have to remove you from the starting lineup. If that understanding is already there, then maybe it could work. But we also said that with the Lakers.
Right.
And then we also said that with the Rockets. And then we also said that with the, you get what I'm saying? So at some
I'm sensing a theme, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so hard because I have in my brain with this situation, I'm with you. I didn't think that it was really all that necessary, and I don't love the fit. But I am kind of curious to see, okay, on a team that is probably embodied the load management philosophy the most in the entire league, getting a guy who is very much in the sixth man of the year conversation because of how he would just come in and put up numbers and just impact, I guess, the game in terms of making his presence felt when he was in LA, when he started turning things, when he was on the Lakers, when he started turning things around. I can see the idea behind, okay, if we don't have Paul George, if we don't have Kawhi, it's going to be really nice to have this guy to throw in there and just expect at least numbers from. So I can wrap my mind around that, but what I am really struggling to wrap my mind around is kind of more of what you talked about with, okay, is he expecting this big role where he is supposedly starting? And I'm not saying that he is or he isn't, but if you have him in there with Kawhi and Paul George, who are very, very good and skilled at getting their own shot and getting their own shot in the mid-range specifically, and kind of taking advantage of matchups. I'm having a lot of trouble envisioning how Russell Westbrook is going to fits
into that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, I like that you mentioned the rim pressure, because I mean, he's very explosive, very athletic, but sometimes I think maybe people they're quick to say, oh, well, the spacing's going to be off, so it's going to be bad. But there is a lot of value in rim pressure. So yeah. I'm going to be intrigued to see how much emphasis and how much he kind of holds himself to being this, if he's this, cutter, this guy that dives, or just where he fits in, because I'm having trouble seeing it consistently and I hate to even say long term, but consistently being what they think it could be. I'm having trouble with that. And so it's a wait and see. And personally, I do hope that he turns it around. I hope that things look good for him, but I just have trouble seeing him being like a key part of the formula that they end up putting out there
to win a championship.
Because that's the goal, right? I mean, that's where they're at. Is they're like, hey man, we're spending all this money year after year, and honestly, maybe Steve Ballmer doesn't even care because he's got a heck of a team and he's got loads of money, but it hasn't worked yet. You haven't won the championship. You're still doing the load management. So we said on our trade deadline episode, on our live stream, I was a big fan of all the moves that they made. And so you're doing all this, it's got to pay off at some point. What more can you do? You know what I mean? And so I'm curious to see how it looks, but it's weird how I felt really confident post trade deadline, but now you throw Russ into this mix. And to me, it's not even necessarily like a knock on him. It's just the fit that I'm having trouble with.
Yeah, I think the ball is in Russell Westbrook's court.
I agree.
In terms of how much he adjusts, how willing he is to change. This really, honestly, is probably his last chance to be a rotation guy in the NBA. Otherwise, I think there will be teams that will come and pick him up and maybe take him as an option, but those won't be championship contending teams. I don't think there will be championship contending teams that will be willing to take on the Russell Westbrook experiment. I really do think this is his last chance to really make an impact on a team that is their goal is to potentially win this season. And I think to your point about pressure, the Clippers have a ton of pressure this season. Like, man, you're in year whatever of Kawhi and Paul George. You have one conference finals run to make for it. And yes, it was the one and only conference finals run in the franchise's history. But when you signed up for Kawhi and PG, you signed up for more than that. So
multiple.
Yeah, multiple championships. So yes, there's absolutely a ton of pressure with the Clippers. And now with Russ, it's just this added pressure. No matter the fact that he's a vet min guy, no matter the fact that he's a guy who they signed off the buyout market, adding him into the fold just adds an extra bit of pressure there that wasn't there beforehand. Wanted to talk about K Love, which is another buyout guy who might have a certain level of impact, signing with the Miami Heat. I'm going to be honest with you, from the Cavs perspective and watching the Cavs this season, I'm honestly surprised they decided to buy him out. I understand why he fell out of the rotation. He wasn't making his shots. Obviously the consistency wasn't there, and they were looking to go a different direction. His defense has not been good, and obviously at his age, he's getting burned a lot more on pick and rolls. I get that. I understand that. But like, when you're a young team like the Cleveland Cavaliers and you're going into playoff games, you will need a voice like Kevin Love in the locker room. Doesn't matter if he's going to play 5 minutes. Doesn't matter if he's going to play 0 minutes. Doesn't matter if he's going to play 25 minutes. You need a guy like Kevin Love in the locker room. Now, you might be able to argue that Danny Green can replicate some of that. You think Donovan Mitchell, who's been in a bunch of playoff games, can replicate some of that. But having Kevin Love, who is a massive part of the franchise, by the way, he's jerseys getting retired, all that stuff. Having him in the locker room, I think, is more important to the Cavs than it is to the Miami Heat. Now, from the Heat's perspective, I think adding that spacing, adding a guy who can shoot, who can kind of make a couple shots for you in a playoff game is huge. I would not be surprised if K Love ends up swinging one single playoff game for the Heat this year. I really think that that's possible. And I think that's a missed opportunity for the Cavs. They let that one fly. But what do you think with K-Love?
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. I really did like the pickup for Miami. I think it's intriguing. I think for all the reasons that Cleveland probably shouldn't have let that one slip, I think it's going to be a massive added bonus for Miami, who has been right at the doorstep of getting the job done and just hasn't quite gotten it done yet. And I don't know that this is necessarily the year, but adding more and more pieces to kind of round out that formula, and the veteran leadership, and even the veteran leadership and experience, but also a guy that can come in and all of a sudden those shots start falling. He gets hot. I mean, I'm absolutely right there with you that he could swing a game, and it could just be the right one that they need, or that changes things for them. So I liked the pickup for them. I'm still a little, I guess, fuzzy on how it all went down in Cleveland, because JB Bickerstaff's quote on, we just felt that this was the right direction, given the information that they had, and that wasn't the exact quote, but it was something to that effect. Between that and even Jared Allen's quote saying, I thought he went out, I believe that was a real quote where he said, I thought he went out for milk and cigarettes, and he never came back. So I'm like, man, I mean, this is a guy, like you say, you mentioned the key and the core impact that he had. And so what a bizarre kind of departure, I felt like. And I'm not saying that it was necessarily bad blood. I don't think it was anything like that. I just thought it was a little bizarre. I wasn't used to buyouts kind of going that way. So I'm intrigued to see the impact with Cleveland. I think Danny Green was a great pickup, but I don't know that it was going to be what Kevin Love would have been. So I agree with you that they let that slip. But I mean, we're going to have to wait and see, because there are even like long-term potential plays for Cleveland, that I am very shocked that they moved on from Kevin Love, for those reasons, but maybe that was coming more from him than anyone else. And I mean, I guess with the signs, maybe that is probably the most likely, and most logical.
Yeah. It's a good bet to make. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of betting, want to bet? Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN, or in Ontario, download the app using the QR code on your screen. 19 plus, please play responsibly. So with K-Love going to the Miami Heat, Russ going to the Los Angeles Clippers, and Nate McMillan out of Atlanta, there is a little bit of a shakeup when it comes to the Eastern Conference, and especially to the Western Conference. We'll see what happens with these buyout guys. There are rarely, and like there's genuinely, it's rare that these buyout guys end up being people who really change the dynamic of the NBA playoffs and the NBA championships. It's rare. It really is rare. I can't remember the last time a buyout guy has significantly impacted your chances of winning an NBA championship.
Follow hosts at Just S Baraheni on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.